dark side of the nursery rhymes. Humpty Dumpty. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. The wall was ancient, built long before the kingdom it bordered. Its stones were dark and jagged, covered in creeping vines that seemed to shift when no one was looking. The villagers whispered that the wall was cursed, a boundary between the world of the living and something far older, far darker. No one dared to climb it except for Humpty. Humphrey Jumon, known to everyone as Humpty, was an eccentric man. He lived alone in a crumbling manor at the edge of the forest, tinkering with strange machines and scribbling incomprehensible notes in his journals. Children in the village made up stories about him, calling him a mad alchemist or a wizard. Adults spoke of him in hushed tones, wary of his peculiar experiments. But no one truly knew what Humpty was up to, not until the night he climbed the wall. It was a moonless evening, the sky thick with clouds that blocked out the stars. Humpty stood at the base of the wall, clutching a small leather-bound book in one hand and a lantern in the other. His breath came in quick, nervous gasps, but his eyes gleamed with determination. "It's there," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his thinning hair. "The answers are there." He had spent years researching the wall, deciphering the runes etched into its surface and piecing together fragments of ancient texts. They all pointed to one thing, a secret hidden at the top, something powerful enough to rewrite the laws of life and death. Humpty was determined to find it. The climb was treacherous. The stones were slick with moss, and the vines seemed almost alive, curling around his hands and feet as if trying to pull him back. But Humpty pressed on, driven by the promise of forbidden knowledge. When he finally reached the top, he found himself standing on a narrow ledge, the wind howling around him. There, in the center of the wall's summit, was a pedestal carved from black stone. On it rested an orb, its surface smooth and glassy, glowing faintly with an inner light. Humpty's hands trembled as he reached for it, his mind racing with the possibilities. He could hear whispers now, soft and insistent, promising him everything he had ever dreamed of. But as his fingers closed around the orb, the wall began to shudder. Cracks spidered out from the pedestal, and the whispers turned to screams. The vines that had been so reluctant to let him climb now lashed out, wrapping around his arms and legs. The orb pulsed in his hands, its light growing brighter and more intense until it was blinding. Humpty tried to let go, but it was too late. The orb's power surged through him, ripping him apart from the inside. He screamed, his body contorting unnaturally as the energy consumed him. With a final deafening crack, the wall split open and Humpty fell. The villagers heard the noise and rushed to the wall, arriving just in time to see the aftermath. Humpty's broken body lay at the base, twisted and shattered beyond recognition. The wall, too, bore the scars of the event, its surface marred by deep fissures that seemed to ooze darkness. The king's men were summoned, along with his finest physicians and alchemists. They worked tirelessly, trying to piece Humpty back together, but it was no use. His body was ruined, and whatever force had inhabited the orb was gone, leaving only an empty husk behind. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen. The villagers spoke of shadows that moved on their own, of whispers that came from nowhere. The wall itself seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, its cracks slowly widening as if something on the other side was trying to break through. The rhyme became a warning, a tale passed down to keep others from making the same mistake. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again, but they unleashed what lay within. Jack and Jill. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. The hill loomed over the small village like a silent sentinel, its slopes covered in wildflowers that swayed in the cold wind. The well at its summit had been there for centuries, its origins lost to time. Some said it was blessed, its waters sweeter than any other. Others whispered of darker things, curses and sacrifices, though no one dared to speak such thoughts aloud. Jack and Jill were siblings, inseparable since birth. They lived on the edge of the village in a small, thatched cottage with their mother. The townsfolk often remarked on their closeness, how they were rarely seen apart. But they did not know the whole truth. Jack and Jill shared more than just a bond of blood. They shared a secret. One fateful afternoon, their mother sent them to fetch water from the well. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the hillside as they climbed. Jack carried the empty pail, his steps sure and steady, while Jill followed closely behind, humming the familiar rhyme their mother had taught them as children. Jack and Jill went up the hill. Her voice trailed off as they reached the top. The well stood before them, ancient and weathered, its stones slick with moss. The air here felt different, heavy and still, as if the hill itself was holding its breath. Jack set the pail down and leaned over the edge of the well, peering into the darkness. The water shimmered faintly, reflecting the fading light of the sky. "It's so deep," he murmured. Jill nodded, but her eyes weren't on the water. She was staring at the carvings etched into the stones around the well's base. Symbols she didn't recognize, sharp and angular, as though they'd been scratched there by desperate hands. She reached out to touch one, but Jack grabbed her wrist. "Don't," he said sharply. "Let's just get the water and go." They lowered the bucket into the well, the rope creaking as it descended. As the pail hit the water, a faint ripple spread across the surface, and the siblings froze. From deep within the well came a sound, a low, guttural moan that sent shivers racing down their spines. "Did you hear that?" Jill whispered. Jack nodded, his face pale. He began to haul the bucket back up, his hands trembling. The pail emerged, brimming with water, but the liquid was dark, almost black, and it reeked of iron. "This isn't right," Jack said, his voice barely audible. "We can't take this back." Before Jill could respond, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. A crack split the earth near the well, and from it came a figure, clawing its way into the dying light. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its limbs too long, its eyes empty sockets that oozed a thick black liquid. It let out a keening wail, and the siblings stumbled back in terror. "Run!" Jack shouted, grabbing Jill's arm. They fled down the hill, the creature close behind. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, as though it were a marionette controlled by unseen hands. Jack tripped on a root and fell hard, his head striking a rock with a sickening crack. He lay still, blood pooling beneath him. "Jack! Jill screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. The creature loomed over them, its gaping maw opening wide. In her desperation, Jill grabbed the pail of dark water and hurled it at the figure. The liquid struck its form, and the creature let out a bone-chilling screech as it dissolved into a cloud of black mist. Jill tried to rouse Jack, but he didn't move. She was left alone on the hillside, cradling her brother's lifeless body as the sun dipped below the horizon. When the villagers found her the next morning, she was still there, rocking back and forth, her hands stained with blood and the strange dark water from the well. They buried Jack on the hill, near the well. Jill never spoke again, her once bright eyes hollow and distant. The villagers avoided the hill after that, and the rhyme took on a darker tone. A warning passed from parent to child. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of slaughter. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill was marked thereafter.
These chilling tales are just the beginning. If you felt the eerie pull of these dark twists on childhood rhymes, there's so much more waiting for you in the full stories. Don't miss out on the full, spine-tingling narrative. If you enjoyed this, remember to like, subscribe, and join us at Vale of Dark Whispers for more terrifying tales that will haunt your dream. Stay curious and stay in the shadows.